Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of our podcast, Happy Queer Adults.
My name is Caitlin.
And I'm Lauren.
And we are Happy Queer Adults.
Lesbians in our 30s, about to have a baby, to be specific.
And in a world with not nearly enough stories about happy queer adults, we wanted to start sharing more of them.
We know that navigating adulthood is hard no matter who you are, but there is an added layer of complexity if you're a member of a marginalized or underrepresented group.
This podcast will explore the nuanced challenges and often beautiful weirdness of navigating adult stages and steps as LGBTQIA+ people, and share insights and tips from experts and queer adults who've been through them.
Ultimately, these shared experiences bring our community closer together, and we want to celebrate that and explore where our queer friends and experts have found acceptance, love, support, and themselves in the queer community.
In our very first episode, we had the opportunity to interview David Ayllon.
David and I work together at Marriott International. He's also done a lot of work for my current company, Storyblocks. He is an award-winning creative director, graphic designer, photographer, and a superhero aficionado.
He currently works as part of the Taco Bell design team and has worked in the creative industry for 15 plus years.
His work has been featured in Graphic Design USA Magazine, Communication Arts, Huffington Post, Out Magazine, Creative Quarterly, Playboy Magazine, and much more.
He's worked with people like Elvira Mistress of the Dark, Kid Cudi, Todrick Hall, Lupe Fiasco, as well as RuPaul's Drag Race winners and NFL stars.
We're so excited for you to hear this conversation where we dig into David's creative work, how it has evolved, his relationship with the drag community, and much more.
Let's play it.
Awesome. So let's start with telling us who you are, what you do, pronouns, that kind of thing.
I'm David Ayllon. My pronouns are he, him, and I am currently a senior art director at Taco Bell. And I do photography and design and illustration and all those other kinds of things.
I was about to not let you get away with just saying that.
It's hard. The art director is it's like the best all-encompassing word for all of the things that I end up doing, but there are a lot of moving parts there.
Have you always been a creative person?
Yes, much to my parents' disappointment. Just kidding. They're actually very happy for me now because I have a grown-up job. But in the beginning, it was like, what even is graphic design? What is this? But yeah, I always like to draw. And for a while, I thought I was going to be a painter until I read about Van Gogh and how he didn't make any money until after he was dead. And I was like, this is not the life for me. So I kind of switched gears to graphic design by accident.
Is that what you studied in college?
Yes, yeah. But I actually kind of started before in high school because I ended up sort of finding a copy of Photoshop through Napster. And I was like, oh, this is cool. This is fun, whatever. And at the time I was like, I'm such a nerd too, that like all the nerdy things kind of filtered back out through graphic design. So like it first started when I was a really big fan of this book series called The Animorphs.
Mm-hmm.
And I made like an Animorphs GeoCities website fan page. And then through Photoshop, I ended up I was also a big fan of like pro wrestling. So then I would make these weird little digital banners for my favorite wrestlers for really no reason. Like I didn't have anywhere to put them. And then it kind of like kept going from there.
I love that.
That's
How
amazing.
old were you when you were doing all these like Animorph and pro wrestling?
It started probably, when did I start reading Animorphs? I would say probably like 7th or 8th grade is when it started. And then it kind of compressed from, kept going from there. And eventually people started to know like, oh, David knows a little bit of Photoshop. Like maybe he could help me with a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And then it kind of just, I had like weird clients, but clients, I use that word loosely. I wasn't getting paid, and it was all like family and friends of family.
I love the image of that because I just imagine you sitting at like the family computer when you're in 7th or 8th grade, and like somebody's behind you being like, "Can I use it now?"
Yeah, and it took so long because I like literally the family computer, just like you said, in the basement.
Yeah.
And my parents were like, what the? Oh, can I curse on here?
Sure.
Yeah.
They were like, what the fuck are you doing on the computer all day? Like down there in the dungeon. And then you college, they would be like, I don't understand what you're doing. Like my dad thought I was like playing, and I'm like, no, this is like career stuff. Like this is gonna, if I learn this better, it's gonna make me more like hireable. And it wasn't until it was really a lot of like, we don't understand what you're doing at any given point in time, until I won a contest it was like right after or not right after, but shortly after I graduated college, for a movie poster for Ed Burns, the actor Ed Burns, and I think it was his first directorial debut, or maybe like he hadn't done a lot of like directing, and it was premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival, and I got to go, and I brought my mom, and that was like, oh, David has like a big name thing under his belt now. I guess it's not just him messing around in the basement anymore.
That's so funny.
So it sounds like it took a while for your parents for it to click for your parents that this could be like a career. When did that when did you realize that this was like kind of what you wanted to pursue?
Kind of always, like kind of like going into college, I was like, people get paid to do this. I know, so I'm going to be one of those people. And that was just kind of it for me. And my parents were very supportive, even though they didn't fully understand what I was doing. They were like, yeah, art stuff, whatever, as long as you make money, because you can't live here for the rest of your life. And it was like my mom was always fully supportive. My dad was just very skeptical. He just didn't
Sure.
understand what success looked like in the creative world. And then once he saw me like getting a little bit of success, that's when he's like, oh, I get it now.
Yeah, as growing up a Jewish kid, the idea of like going into marketing or a creative profession, it never even crossed my mind. I was doing similar stuff, like I was making home videos and editing video and all this stuff, but I thought that you could be a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, like something like that. Those are like professions. So it's amazing that you kind of like had that growing up, just like the confidence in yourself, even though your family didn't have that understanding.
I think it's like a combination of confidence, uh, stupidity, stubbornness. But yeah, I mean, right out of college, I actually started my own T-shirt company
Oh,
that
wow.
lasted 3 years, and it was me, my aunt, and two of my friends, and we did it for a couple years. It really wasn't going anywhere, but again, it was one of those things where like in the moment I was like, this is my last job, this is it, I'm just gonna be Mr. T-shirt guy. It's gonna be great, it's gonna be amazing. Didn't quite work out that way, but I learned a lot from it.
I feel like it's coming full circle now for you. Do you want to? I feel like you have to talk about the t-shirt that I just bought. I think it's coming today from Target.
Yeah, it's totally random. So when I had first started my like photography journey, because I was always afraid of cameras. There were just like too many buttons and too many settings. Like, don't ask me about an f-stop or aperture or shutter speed. I don't know what those things are. I mean, I do now, but at the time I was like, this is too much. And then I started doing photography because of a homework assignment for grad school when I was getting my master's in design. And then at the same time, my husband, Joe, aka Pissi Myles, was starting her drag career, and she needed photos. So she was my model for my homework assignment, and we took photos like for her flyers and stuff. And that's kind of how it started. And we made friends in the drag community, one of which was Bob the Drag Queen, who at the time was like a big name in New York, but that was kind of it. And we took photos of her, and then she got on Drag Race. And then we took I did another photo shoot with her in her living room. And it didn't click for me that like suddenly the audience was much bigger. So I took this photo of her with like paint dripping down her head, and I borrowed my sister's like toy gun and like did some crazy stuff. Like literally she was like, I just need promo photos on a white background. And then as the paint was still dripping down her head and she was clearly uncomfortable in her corset, I was like, if you just give me 5 more minutes, I just want to like experiment with some light stuff. And I like moved some things around quickly. She let me snap the photo and then she like ripped all the drag off. But that photo 6 years ago is now on a t-shirt in Target as part of their Pride collection because they collaborated with Bob the Drag Queen. And I think it's one of her like best-selling 8x10s, like when she does conventions and stuff, which is why it's a very popular image that I see kind of all the time, which is crazy to me because I didn't really know what I was doing when I took it. But yeah, now it's in a Target, which is awesome.
It's amazing. It shows how good your instincts are, even at the beginning. Let's talk about Pissi and your family, and yeah, tell us about your husband.
Yeah, so Pissi, aka Joe, I might use the terms interchangeably. But yeah, I met Joe, oh God, 10 years ago, about, or a little more than 10 years ago at this point. And we started dating, and at the time he had just graduated with a degree in musical theater and had an agent and was going on auditions and acting and stuff. And then about a year and a half in, he wasn't getting the bookings that he was hoping for and like didn't know what to do. And we were big fans of Drag Race at the time. And I was like, you would make a great drag queen. And he's like, I don't know, there's not a career in drag. And then he started doing it. And then, I created a monster because he's still doing it today. But it kind of worked out because we collaborate a lot because they're both obviously creative fields, but we don't really clash. It really like one helps the other. And like I said, he was my first model when I was still like learning a camera, and then cut to today, and he is part of a Taco Bell campaign that I just shot, which is amazing. And it's just so weird knowing like where it started in my mom's living room, just like being like, I guess this button does this, who knows, to now is just kind of insane.
It's amazing. So tell us about how you working with Joe has evolved over time.
You know, I would say the best part about working with Joe is he working with him is it inspires me a lot. There are a lot of things that I start to do with Pissi before I'm confident enough to do it anywhere else. So like even when we worked at Marriott, right? We did a campaign for Courtyard where it was like a portrait series of everyday people, like someone playing guitar, someone gardening, whatever, but they had like the eye black that the football players wear. Um that style of portraiture I tested on Pissi first. And a lot of things like when I was learning animation, when I was like experimenting with different kinds of design, like I always tried it on Pissi first. So that way, if it like sucked, who cares, right? Like no one's gonna be mad about it. Like Pissi's not gonna fire me or divorce me, or at least I hope not. So that's kind of where that starts, and then I bring it into like work life. So then I was confident enough to like bring it to Marriott, or even stuff with Taco Bell, and like all of those things lived with Pissi before I like was able to bring them into my work elsewhere.
Have you experienced any pushback from these big brands when you bring drag culture or drag culture into the work that you do for them?
Some Taco Bell is not like that. In fact, they had already been working on their drag brunch series for like a year before I even started working here, which is awesome. I kind of got in at the perfect time. But I have been in places in the past where like even getting them to make their logo a rainbow during Pride Month was like a struggle. It was like a fight, you know? Um, but for the most part, aside from a few instances in the workplace where it was definitely like I had to tread lightly, mostly everybody has been very cool with it. And I think now too, drag is so mainstream that, you know, it's it's clear that like they kind of all want to get on the bandwagon in some way, shape, or form. But I was, of course, pushing for things like before it was that cool, you know. But yeah, it seems like a lot of people have caught up in that regard.
Do you feel like, so we worked together at Marriott and now working at Taco Bell, obviously very different vibes at both of those places, but do you feel like you can bring, you know, having worked in different sort of corporate American companies, aside from the work that's going out, do you feel like you could bring your whole self to work?
Yes, but that's only because, again, through the magic of uh, stubbornness and stupidity, I've never not done that, you
Yeah.
know. Um, and it's so weird, you know. Like I attribute it a lot to my parents because even when they were a little confused about what I wanted to do with my life and what I wanted to be, they were always like, "Yeah, like whatever makes you happy, as long as you can make money doing it, like why not?" And so I always had that permission. And so even at Marriott, you know, I had this septum piercing, you know, I still had an armful of tattoos and some neck tattoo, you know, whatever. It wasn't ever anything that I hid. In fact, I mean, Lauren, I feel like you can let me know this, but I feel like everybody at Marriott knew about Pissy too, like very shortly after I started working there, you know what I mean? So it was never a secret. I think in past work environments, like there was an agency once where I can't remember if Joe had started doing drag yet or not, but at the time, at the very least, we were very big fans of Drag Race. And so I would talk about it at work because, again, I never really tried to hide anything. And there were comments made when I wasn't in the room that one of my coworkers told me who I was friends with, and they would say things like, if they were planning a photo shoot, they'd be like, "Oh, we should just get David to do the makeup," blah, 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 and like little jabs like that. But it never really stopped me from talking about the things that made me happy because it's drag, it's comic books, it's horror movies. It's I mean, I'm always talking about that stuff. They just make me happy. So as long as I can get the work done for the company, they tend to not really care.
So it's very clear to me how your identity and your involvement in the world of drag has influenced your like work that you've done outside of your day job. But can you talk a little bit about how it's impacted the work you've done for those day jobs we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of ties back to what I was saying about Pissy, you know, being able to experiment and things in the world of drag, not just with Pissy, but sometimes with our friends who are nightlife performers. Um, and then sort of bringing it into the workplace. I feel like when you work in nightlife, you have to be sort of everything. Like Pissy can't just be a drag queen, she also has to have like a great social media presence, and she's got to be a promoter, and she's got to be a producer, and she's got to be all those things. And so a lot of times I'll step in to like help produce shows and to put together a social media campaign, and like I built her website and, you know, designed her merch for her t-shirts and all that stuff. And uh you know, so I tend to bring that to work. Whether or not they go for it is a different
Mhm.
story. But I usually like go in pitching a more extra kind of idea, and then they'll like tone it down for me. um but you know, I would rather that than like not really bring something that's that creative in the first place, for sure.
Have you always I guess when did you come out?
I came out late. I came out freshman year of college. Um and so like I don't know. I mean, it felt late, right? It might be not that late for some people, but it felt late to me. Because at that point, like I had not like kissed a boy, like I had not done anything. I was just like blinders. We're just gonna read comic books all day. That's all we're gonna do. Um, But yeah, I had come out then, and it was for the most part well received. There were some family members like not so much, and it took them a little time to come around. I remember, and this is like not to sound shady towards my dad because he's come such a long way, but at the time I remember he was like, I don't want to meet any of your boyfriends. Don't bring them to the house. Like, we're done. Um, but then when he met Joe, he like treated Joe amazing from jump. My dad is a very scary man. He is like the definition of like macho Cuban man. I'm gonna build things and whatever, and like complete opposite of me, right? And when he met Joe, it sort of like, I don't know, I think it sort of uh not that I was gonna say humanized, as if he didn't see me as a human already, but you know what I mean? Like when certain people think of gay or queer and they're not used to it, they just think like of the dirty sex stuff and they don't think about the relationships. And so to see me in a relationship with someone who cared for me so much, I think like helped shift a lot of things. And then he started coming to Joe's drag shows, and now he's Pissi's biggest fan. So like complete 180 from when it first started.
Oh, I love that.
It's amazing. Yeah, I feel like that happens more often than not, or at least with people I've talked to, where there's always this assumption or this connection with queerness with like the sex side of it. And I think once you attach like an actual person, it totally changes everything. So I don't know. It's very true to a lot of the experiences that I've had or I've heard as well, where parents have really come around the second they actually connect a person that you're seeing to it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's like, at the time I didn't understand it. I was mad at everybody that like didn't accept me right away. But I remember I was talking to a friend of mine who was also queer, and I was telling her about my experience coming out, and she was like, well, you have to remember it took you however many years to accept yourself. So like
Yep.
give these family members like a little bit of grace to get there as well, which sort of like changed my perspective too. So luckily everything worked out. I'm very lucky in that way. Could have been a lot worse.
When you came out, did you sort of dive into the queer community at your school, or was that even present for you?
No, I'm just so nerdy. I am just such an introvert. Well, I wouldn't say introvert, but I'm a homebody for sure. I just like my space. I like my stuff. I like, all those kinds of things. So it wasn't until really like I would experiment, right? At the time I had a MySpace, so I was like, oh, I'm gonna put gay on my MySpace. That's like the big thing for me in that moment. And then I would go to like gay bars sometimes, but not really that much because I was never really a big drinker. And it wasn't until Joe and I started dating and he started doing drag that like that was sort of my into the community where like I felt like I could contribute and that I belonged there. For some reason, which is both a good thing and a bad thing, I always want to be of service to other people. Like I have a yearning to like lead with like, oh, I can do this for you and I can do that for you. And that's most of the time ends up biting me in the ass. But uh, that was sort of like a way for me to feel comfortable. Like I belonged there because it felt like even in the queer community, it's better now with like the way that the internet has grown. But at the time I was like, well, you think of gay guys, you think of Will and Grace, you think, they love Cher and they love Britney and Madonna and whatever. And that like wasn't really like the stuff that I was into. I could talk about horror movies and I could talk about Batman all day, but like it just never felt like I belonged. So once I had that in through Pissi and through taking photos for other queens and helping them with their show flyers or whatever, then I sort of like got to be in the community. And then I met a whole bunch of people that were like me that could also talk about Batman and and all those things all day as well.
I'm curious how, this is sort of a two-parter, but how has the drag community evolved since you've been a part of it?
Mhm.
And then also, how have you evolved from being part of the drag community?
Um, I think the drag community has evolved. I mean, it, the biggest piece is RuPaul's Drag Race. You know, it's sort of a blessing and a curse because it's made drag more mainstream and has allowed for a lot of queens to sort of be in the limelight of mainstream, which is great. There are so many more opportunities now, I feel, than ever before. But at the same time, there's this association with like, if you haven't been on Drag Race, then you know you're somehow a subpar queen. And a lot of people forget that all the queens that were on that TV started as a local queen somewhere. So it's sort of this constant battle of like having to appear, you know, at a certain level. And a lot of that, you know, it costs money to put a lot of those costumes together and to get wig styled in like crazy new ways all the time. And I feel like there's this balance of like managing your wallet and also trying to appear like, you know, you are a queen that can stand among all of these, you know, quote unquote famous queens that were not in the public eye, you know, 5-10 years ago. And then as far as me, how I've developed, uh I don't know. I would say like I said before, it was my into the community. And so it makes me feel like I'm a part of something. And I don't think that if I hadn't connected drag with like what I do creatively, if I ever would have gotten there. Or maybe I would have, but it would have taken a little longer for sure.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I feel like, having spoken to several queer people, I think that finding your place in the community has always been tricky because you want to tread lightly at times. You don't know where you fit in, and sometimes you feel like you don't fit the stereotypical mold of a queer person, and so you're like, is this where I belong or not? And I love that you found your place in a way that I don't know maybe you ever expected to find it.
No, not at all. Like not even I didn't ever there's so many like avenues that have opened up that I didn't expect at the time. Like didn't expect to be married to a drag queen. Didn't expect to do photography because there are numbers involved and I don't want any part of that. Didn't expect like even at the time I remember being like kind of afraid of drag queens. You know, like drag queens can be like very so witty and sharp that like you're just worried they're going to just read you down to the ground at any moment, which, you know, sometimes they do. But like there's something very like punk rock about drag that like, you know, me being a soft emotional boy at the time was like, oh, I don't know if I should go there. But I think that sort of finding my place there helped me be more confident in all other areas. And I think that's why I have been able to like bring drag in some way, shape, or form, whether it's actually bringing a drag queen into a campaign for a company or just bringing something that I've done photographically with a drag queen into what I'm doing creatively at work. It's given me that confidence because, you know, if I can put up with the drag queens and stand tall against them on a microphone in a dark bar, then, you know, work's not so bad.
Have you seen a lot of that love that you have given to the queer community given back to you?
I think um it's mostly been love. There are haters that come up, you know, and that's sort of something that I've realized as I've photographed more bigger name queens. You know, sort of the more success that you get, the more negativity you kind of get too. But for the most part, a lot of people have been so supportive, and a lot of it's because, you know, I try to be very transparent with the queens, and I try to respect their time, and hope they respect mine. So there have been plenty of times where like I'm not getting paid because I'm experimenting with a new kind of lighting or an idea that I've never done before, and it might suck. It might be terrible. So let's just like experiment together, and if it works out, great. If it doesn't, then no. So I think a lot of queens, um I mean, who doesn't love free stuff, right? But a lot of queens understand that, that's a lot of time and energy, and they've been really supportive and helpful. And so many of those queens, again, we've worked with pre drag race and then post drag race, have been like really kind, and like now they have some money to throw my way even if I'm not asking for it. And so like we've all kind of grown in our careers together in different ways. Back then I was working at a nonprofit, not really making a lot of money, and they were just working in a bar in Brooklyn. And now they're on Drag Race, I'm at Taco Bell. It's all kind of like the fruits of our labor from even all the way back then.
That's amazing. I love that.
So I know for me, in the same way that I think getting immersed in the drag culture sort of opened up a portal's the wrong word, but like a part of the queer community that you found a little bit of yourself in. I think for me, social media has done that a lot, because like you, I never felt like I fit stereotypes of lesbians that I saw on television or in media growing up. And so getting to see other people on TikTok or YouTube or, originally like Tumblr, things like that, growing up really helped me. But I think especially over the last like 3 years, as like social media has picked up and seeing more and more of that representation, has made me feel much more a part of the queer community. And I'm curious how social media has affected your journey. And I'm also curious, just broadly from what we're talking about, from like queer creators, drag queens, too. Like I imagine social would have a big effect on how they can reach people. So would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, at way back when, I was like, I want to talk about Freddy Krueger and Batman, not like Madonna and Cher. No shade to Madonna and Cher, they're great, but like, those are the things that I'm into. And so at that time, because we weren't exposed to a lot, there wasn't a whole lot of visibility of like different types of queer people out there. I was like, oh, well, I don't really fit anywhere. I don't know where I'm supposed to stand. So having social media now, it's like, it's so cool because I'll have some people reach out to me and DM me just about my work, or like random queens wanting to work with me. But then also I'm connecting to a lot of different people, especially through like, I think a big one was when Pissi had started her podcast. And I feel like you guys might go through a very similar journey as you like continue your podcast too. But her podcast, it was called My Spooky Gay Family. The episodes are still up, but they no longer do it anymore. It was Pissi and her sister, her biological sister. And they just talked about horror movies and ghost stories and stuff. It's really cool. And we ended up, because I was sort of like the social media manager, unofficially, unpaid, for the podcast, I reached out to a lot of different other queer podcasts and just researched them just to see like, who is their audience? What kind of episodes are they doing? Shooting them a DM or whatever. And like, they are all so nice. And a lot of podcasts that I had never heard of before doing that work. And now we're still friendly with a lot of them, even though like Pissi hasn't continued her own podcast anymore. But again, finding that community through social media of like, I have so many queer people on my phone that I immediately texted on Friday morning that was like, girl, I saw Doctor Strange last night. What did you think? Like that wasn't something that I could do, or that I didn't have a lot of, 10 years ago, because social media just like wasn't what it is now. So I think it's helped a lot of people find each other in a way that just wasn't possible before. And it makes you feel not as isolated in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I love that. I totally agree. And I feel like it's been such a connective tissue, that's, I feel like, sped up so much during the pandemic as well. So that's amazing that you've had that similar experience. I'm curious about, I would love to hear what you, if you could talk a little bit about the work you're doing with Taco Bell and the drag brunch campaign.
Yeah, so I was put on the creative team as like one of the I don't know if I'm a creative lead, but I'm one of the people mix in there, especially because they know that I'm married to a drag queen, so I have a lot of experience in that arena. But I got to help sort of art direct some of the materials for the brunches and, as far as like decor and all that stuff, as well as like fully concept and photograph the press images that came out when it was announced. And I got to have Pissi in the campaign, which honestly was more of a favor to me because it was my first big Taco Bell like photography project, and I was like, this has to be perfect. So Pissi helped me style wigs for free, and like she put together fake little burritos to put as rollers in one of the queen's hair, and
I love that.
like helping me, like letting me borrow jewelry and helping me like hot glue sauce packets to beret clips to then clip into the wig. Like there are so many things that like we would do normally for a shoot we're doing in our living room. It was like very like we had 2 weeks to throw it all together, so we called in a lot of favors from friends to like make props and to like help let us borrow some jewelry for the event. And so like it ended up coming out exactly how I pictured it in my mind, and it ended up being really, really amazing. But it's just so cool that I even get to do that at work. I feel that way about a lot of moments when I'm working at Taco Bell, like even going back to having had my Tshirt Company when I was like right out of school. It was like, oh, I'm still hand drawing with pencil and paper these t-shirt designs the same way that I did 10 or more than 10 years ago, and like here I am doing it, and like I'm not just doing it for free, I'm like getting paid to do it. This is my job now. This is really cool. So yeah, it's been really, really awesome. And the the fact that they had been working on it a year prior, it's cool that Taco Bell has um they have ERGs, which is like employee resource groups. So it's like they have something called Moss Pride, which is like almost like the gay straight alliance of Taco Bell. But they help put on events and like suggest things. So I think it was through them that the brunch even got started, and I was hired at like the perfect time to help influence the creative because that part hadn't been started yet. Um, and so yeah, it's been great. They're stopping at a bunch of cities. They already did Vegas. They're doing Fort Lauderdale, New York City, Nashville, and I'm like totally blanking. I feel like there's at least one more, but you can go online and Google it.
So for a quick context, what exactly is Taco Bell doing? What is Taco Bell's drag brunch?
So it's just it's sort of a temporary activation, but I feel like it will influence a lot of things down the road. So right now the original plan was to help promote their breakfast menu items. So this was sort of a way to sort of like bring that into the conversation. And they wanted to do it in a way that wasn't just like just Pride Month and then we're done. It's something that's sort of lasting a little longer, which is very, very cool of them. So there's just a lot of love for it, and I feel like it won't end here. I feel like it's going to keep continuing in other ways, in other moments, for sure.
I love that. I feel like drag culture has become a lot more mainstream over the past couple of years, especially with Drag Race and things like that being more popularized. And it's been interesting to watch it sort of become normalized within the straight communities as well. Like I helped put together a bachelorette party for a friend of mine, and the thing that everybody wanted to do was go to drag brunch, and I am the only queer person in this group. So it was very interesting to see all of these women get so excited about being in drag culture, even though it was just for like an hour and a half.
Yeah, it's like it's crazy how much it's changed. You know, I remember even when Pissy first started doing drag, it was definitely more popular than it had been in decades prior because Drag Race had started at that point. I think it was in its fifth season when Pissy started doing drag. But it wasn't what it is today. So to get friends and family to some of the shows, it was like, oh, is this like, you know, it's a gay bar. I've never been to a gay bar. Like, this is so crazy, whatever. But now you can like go to a drag brunch at a Taco Bell, but like restaurants and establishments that aren't necessarily queer, um, because they understand the money making opportunities of having something like that in their place of business. So it's definitely shifted a lot, that it's very much in the straight zeitgeist. I mean, hearing like so many straight people say things like "not today, Satan," "yes, queen," like all that stuff is so, it's wild to me because it's just, I feel like a lot of straight people, even like "not today, Satan" specifically, that was a line from Bianca Del Rio in, I think, the sixth season of Drag Race. And I feel like there are people today saying that line, not knowing like where it came from at all, which is, it's just so crazy. And that, how long ago was that? That was a long time ago, season 6. They're on 14 now. So almost 10 years ago. Yeah, it's all crazy. It's good though, in the sense of there are so many more opportunities for queens, and especially because there's a finite amount of queer businesses and queer bars that would have had drag shows in the past, and now that it doesn't only have to be in a queer bar to have a drag night or a burlesque night or, you know, whatever, there are more ways for these performers to make money and places to perform at. So um I it's great in that sense for sure.
Do you see any downside to it in terms of being becoming like more mainstream in straight culture?
Yes. um I think, you know, it's very interesting because like I said, my idea of drag queens before I was really a part of the community, you know, it was very subversive and punk rock and like maybe a little scary, but like in a fun way. Um, and now with Drag Race, you know, it's got such a young audience now that a lot of the queens um are put on this pedestal to be like role models. And you know, I know a lot of queens that should not be a role model to anybody. Uh, and so it's sort of created this weird expectation for queens to be more like Disney princesses than punk rockers, which is not necessarily the idea of drag that I have always had. Even with Pissy, like she will not ever in her life do a drag queen story time. And that's not any shade to queens that would do it. I think it's really awesome, but Pissy, it can be very subversive, and her comedy, you know, is rooted in insult comedy, and like, you know, she wants that edge as part of her character, but there are so many people that like want to pull her away from that, it seems at times. So yeah, it's just a very interesting dynamic now that I think like isn't suited for everybody, but it's sort of how, you know, the mindset has shifted socially.
Yeah, I definitely feel like there are a couple lines that you have to walk when you are in between doing insult comedy and drag story time.
I mean, Caitlin and I went to a drag bingo last night with my ERG at Storyblocks, and the queen was telling us that she did an event recently and she didn't know what PTA meant. And so she hopped on expecting it to be some like corporate, you know, bingo thing, and it ended up being like 100 families with kids, and she was like not prepared to perform in front of children. And so just, yeah, I think you're 100% right. It's just like this expectation of almost moving it to like Disney princess sort of style. Yeah, it's really interesting how that's changed.
It's crazy too because like Pissy has her like weekly New York City shows that start way past my bedtime, and she can say and do whatever she wants in those shows. But then she also has these like corporate gigs. A lot of them are like over Zoom, like Zoom bingos for companies and stuff. But she is often not even marketed as Pissi Myles. She is marketed as Miss Myles. So that gives you kind of a sense of like how much she has to change how she performs and the kinds of jokes that she can make for that hour and a half.
Yeah.
Like she doesn't love doing those because it's a lot more energy to stop herself from saying, you know, the dirty joke that comes into her brain. But there are more and more gigs that are like that for a lot of queens, and some queens that like is totally cool, and maybe they're not like the dirtiest drag queen in the world like my husband can be sometimes, and it's fine. But for him it takes a lot of extra effort and energy to like censor himself for sure.
Yeah, I can't imagine that. That's so hard to like toe that line. I feel that way even when I like do stuff like this of trying to figure out how to like turn on and off that part of my brain. So I'm curious, we talked a little bit about the Taco Bell brunch, going back to like pride campaigns for companies. You mentioned that the Taco Bell brunch is going beyond just pride. I'm curious what you feel like brands can do to support the queer community beyond Pride Month.
Beyond Pride Month, I mean, it's sort of the same or a similar conversation, I would say, about big companies and inclusivity in general. You know, I used to work at a nonprofit that also wanted to be very inclusive to people of color. And their idea, or a lot of their ideas at the time, was they wanted to sort of it was more like charity fundraisers for like children of color that were like in not great financial family situations and things like that, which is great. And I think those kinds of things are super helpful to the community. If you're doing something for Pride or beyond Pride and you're donating to a nonprofit that helps queer youth or trans people of color, like that's all great. Everybody can always use more money, especially these days, right? But I remember having a conversation even way back then at a previous job that it doesn't always have to be like, oh, like look at these poor people of color, or like look at these poor queer people. You know, it could also be exalting amazing queer people and people of color without having to have that sort of like savior complex to that event or that promotion. And I feel like there isn't a ton of that, especially outside of Pride Month. Like you could just feature a really awesome queer person in your campaign in March or in November, just cause, you know, and it doesn't have to be this big thing that's like, look at us, we love the gays. So I think sort of, you know, in addition to donating to charities and nonprofits and helping queer people in that way, I think it's also really important. It kind of goes back to our talk about, you know, visibility and sort of like seeing where you fit within even the community. Seeing examples of queer people that are just awesome and like successful and amazing and, you know, in those positions is also a way to help support the queer community in a really important way, in a different way, but a very important way.
And I think that the work that you're doing right now and in the past proves that positive queer representation, no matter when it happens, if it's done authentically and well, like actually translates to business impact. Like you have now a cited example, and I think that is so amazing for other brands to be able to see that if they do it the right way and bring the community in the right way, that it can really actually benefit them.
Be profitable.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Get that gay dollar.
I mean, the reality is that we are a part of the market, you know, and a lot of us have disposable income. So why not tap into it?
Yeah, I mean, I remember having conversations with other queer people back when it like first started to be kind of cool to do a little something, throw a little rainbow on something during Pride Month as a big company. And at first I remember being very bitter about it and be like, ugh, like whatever, right? And then it sort of like translated to, well, money, unfortunately, is the language that most people speak, especially in this country. So if money is saying that we are valuable members of the community, then, you know, that's a good first step, right? So it sort of started with companies really only doing stuff during Pride Month, and then that was it. And now I think a lot of companies are sort of uh moving that towards wanting to feel more authentic and not only doing stuff during Pride Month and doing things that are a little bit more substantial. And I feel like we had to like take that step of just Pride Month rainbows to get to here, and like hopefully from here then it sort of will translate to like year-round things and seeing our community as, you know, as valuable, you know, as marketable, as profitable, because we always have been, you know. I feel like uh it- even seeing now being a part of a section of the queer community that loves horror and comic book geekiness, like we're buying comic books too. We're going to see those movies. We're going to like, we're dressing up as the Scarlet Witch to go see the premiere of Doctor Strange. Like we're everywhere. We're doing all the things. So it only makes sense for you to acknowledge the community and include us in all the things.
Absolutely.
Oh, good.
And I think that also has borne out in what I perceive to be the rise in queer-owned companies, especially within the lesbian community, talking about clothing brands like Tomboy X and people who are gearing their clothing towards more gender fluid or non-binary people, and seeing them be a success and be profitable is such a exciting thing to see.
I know. And I'm also interested too, like what you're talking about with straight people and, you know, their sort of now interest in drag culture. It's sort of across the board too, where it's flipped, where, you know, talking about queer culture or putting out positive representation of queer culture is not just appealing to the queer community anymore. In certain ways. So it's interesting that like you're seeing, we saw that article about like how it's cool to now wear like lesbian suits for like straight women and like all, you know, all that stuff, where it's just like, I think there's like starting to be parts of the queer community in terms of how we dress and how we speak, like you said, are starting to be like more mainstream for certain pockets of the straight community as well.
And it feels like a little bit of a validation, right? Like not like both personally and like societally. I don't know if that's a word, but we're going with it. Because the stuff that I'm like doing now for clients and companies is the same stuff that I was doing, you know, a decade ago, almost, and nothing's really changed. I always knew that these kinds of photographs and using queens and nightlife performers, I always knew that they were like magical beings, right? To me, queens and kings and burlesque performers are like the closest thing I'll ever come to like actually hanging out with a superhero in real life, you know? Like they have like a dual identity going on. They've got great costumes, spandex, all makeup, all of it, right? So I always knew that, but at the time in the beginning, it felt like nobody else got that. And now it's like, oh, now everybody's catching up, you know? And even like in horror, you're seeing more queer horror films and queer characters in horror films. Like even Scream, like, which I'm a big fan of the Scream franchise, but having a queer character, like a queer lesbian of color in Scream is like amazing and something that like wasn't in the original ones. In fact, there weren't really many I mean, yeah, in the first one, I can't even tell you if there was a person of color in there. Definitely not a queer person. And like to see things shifting and changing, um, it feels like, well, I always knew that I belonged in that universe, but it's good to see you got there. Took you a little while, but so it's nice to see all of those things that like I feel like we as queer people always knew, whether it's fashion or like, you know, that you can be sexy and be in clothing that isn't like hyper feminine or hyper masculine. You can be in clothing that maybe is hyper feminine or hyper masculine and like opposite of how you normally represent or how society thinks you should represent. And like we always knew that, but now it's everybody else is catching up, and it's very nice to see.
Absolutely.
I love that.
What advice would you have for somebody who is struggling to find their place in the queer community?
Ooh, let's see. I think first and foremost, using the internet as a tool. You know, like I said, I've never been a big drinker, so hanging out, you know, in the bars and in the clubs. I'm also a terrible dancer, so I'm not going to the club either. So that was just like never how I was gonna meet people really. But you know, now there are websites like meetup.com where that I can type in queer comic book or queer geek whatever, and like a bunch of meetup groups in my area will pop up. Or if you're in an area maybe where there isn't that, like start one, because I guarantee you other people are Googling it too. There Facebook groups, there's even I found, again, through the sort of podcasting community, I feel like there are communities that pop up and sprout around podcasts that uh sort of become this like hub of people that have common interests almost accidentally. So like with My Spooky Gay Family, one of our listeners started a Facebook fan group just kind of on a whim, and then a bunch of listeners joined, and even though the podcast has not continued, not since like basically the beginning of this year, they still all talk to each other, and like they are still posting in the fan group sometimes and like posting memes and talking about whatever new movie came out and stuff. So there are so many pockets to find your people, and to find your tribe within obviously the bigger, you know, your people, that it's there. If you throw a stone, you'll hit somebody that likes all the same.
All right, so we're going to ask you our final question, which is tell us how you are a happy queer adult.
Oh, how am I a happy queer adult? Okay. The adult part and the queer part is easy because I am in my early to early 30s, wink, and also queer. But the happy part, I don't know, probably gonna go see Doctor Strange again this weekend. That'll make me really happy. The bills are paid, there's food in the fridge. My husband's sleeping in the bedroom next door. You know, there's a lot to be happy and grateful about in my world, I think.
I love that.
Amazing. Thank you so much for doing this with us and going on this ride with us. Tell us where we can follow you and find your work.
Okay, you can find my work at my website, davidayllon.com, davidayllon.com. My Instagram handle is very easy, also my name, at David Ayllon. Yeah, Facebook, you know, all the things. I'm pretty much there. I kind of have a TikTok, but I don't post. I just use it to creep on other people's TikToks. Maybe that'll change in the future. Who knows? But yeah, anybody can hit me up through Instagram. Usually that's probably the best way, or through email. With any photography questions, graphic design questions about horror movies. I'm game for all of it.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, David.
Thanks so much for listening to our very first episode of Happy Queer Adults. We will be releasing new episodes the first Wednesday of each month. and we have a ton of incredible guests coming up. We cannot wait for you to hear what's next. Our music is by Kevin Burke. You can find him at Kevin Burke Music on Instagram. Our branding and artwork is by Mike O'Brien. You can find him at Red Table Press on Instagram. We want to start doing a segment of the show called LGBTQ&A, where we'll answer questions from the community about queer adulthood. So if you have one for us, please submit them to happyqueeradults@gmail.com or send us a DM on Instagram. You can find us at happyqueeradults.com or at happyqueeradults on Instagram and TikTok, or at happyqueerpod on Twitter. You can find full episodes of our show on YouTube and listen to them on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you like what you heard and want more content from us, please leave us a 5-star review. And again, thank you so much for listening, and have a very happy, very queer day.